Hi, I'm Nigel Atherton. I'm the editor of Amateur Photographer magazine, and today I'm looking at two cameras which both appeal to a similar type of user, and that is the person that really loves retro design cameras. We've got the Fujifilm X-T5 and we've got the Nikon Zf. So if you're a fan of retro cameras, perhaps you grew up using 35mm SLRs like the classic Nikon FM type cameras, or you're maybe a younger person that just thinks those cameras are really cool, and you're not wrong, then up to now there's only been one brand to look at, and that's Fujifilm with their X series, currently on the X-T5. They've been around for about 10 years now, and over the different evolutions of different models, they've improved them, they've refined them, and they've got to this point with the X-T5, which for many people is pretty much the perfect camera. I'm a Nikon user. I've been using Nikon for about 30 years, and I've got a lot of Nikon kit, a lot of Nikon lenses, and to be honest with you, I've been looking over at the Fujifilm X series and thinking, I really like these cameras. I'm not going to sell all my Nikons to buy one of these cameras, but I would like one all the same. But now Nikon have actually thrown a spanner in the works by bringing out a retro camera of their own. So now I've got this big dilemma. If I was going to buy a new retro style camera, would I still choose the X-T5, which is probably my favourite camera, or has been my favourite camera for quite a while? Or has the Zf taken that crown now? So let's look at the pros and cons of the Fujifilm X-T5 versus the Nikon Zf. And then perhaps by the end of this video, I will have decided myself which of these two cameras I prefer, because right now I'm not 100% sure, because I think there's pros and cons for each one. And let's take a look at them now. So let's start by looking at the aesthetics and the body design. So if your point of reference is a camera like the classic Nikon FM2, then clearly the X-T5 is the most closely in terms of size and weight. In fact, there's only 20 grams difference between the X-T5 body and the FM2 body. And to hold the camera, it feels very much in the hand like, in terms of size and weight, like 35mm SLR. The Zf, on the other hand, is a bit of a beast. It's 720 grams. And that's partly because it's got a professional build quality, magnesium alloy body, weather sealing, brass dials, and it's a relatively heavier camera. In fact, it probably feels more like a Nikon F3 than an FM2 in terms of weight. It's much closer to the F3 in terms of weight than it is to the FM2. Aesthetically, I think they're both beautiful, and it's purely a matter of choice as to which one you like the look of. I've always looked at the Fujifilm X series and thought these were probably the most beautiful cameras on the market, but the Zf really does give it a run for its money. I think I love the leatherette stuff on the side of the prism. If anything, I think the Zf possibly beats the Fujifilm in looks, but it is a purely subjective decision. The most important thing, of course, is not what it looks like, but how it is to use. And I think when you pick up the two cameras, there's a clear difference in terms of how they handle. The Fujifilm X-T5 has not a huge hand grip, but it does have a hand grip on the front, and it has also a thumb rest on the back, so that it's quite comfortable to hold, quite comfortable to pick up. I would happily use this one-handed if I needed to, and it's just ergonomically feels great. The shutter button is perfectly positioned, and overall it's a really good, really refined experience. The size feels good in the hand also. The Zf, on the other hand, is a different matter. It's heavier than you think it's going to be when you pick it up, because it's solid magnesium alloy body, brass dials. It's a professionally built construction from Nikon, as you'd expect from Nikon. In fact, it's better built than the Z6 and Z7 type cameras. So it immediately makes it heavier, and because there's no grip, it means that it's not that comfortable to hold. It's fine when you've got a small lens like this, but if you put a bigger lens on, like the 24-120 for example, or anything like this, it soon becomes quite uncomfortable to use without a grip. Fortunately, there is a solution, and that there is a grip, and it's produced by Small Rig. This is the Small Rig grip. It's only about £40 or less, but by putting this on the bottom, it transforms the Zf into a camera which is like holding a brick, to a camera which actually handles like a proper camera. And then when you put the two side by side, it does make the camera a little bit bigger and a little bit taller, but it has such a transformational effect on the way that it handles that I would recommend anyone buying this should buy the Small Rig grip immediately. So let's talk about it from now on with the grip on, because that's how I used it. So which of these cameras gives the most authentic retro user experience? Well, clearly the Fujifilm does, because unlike the Nikon, Fujifilm has a large range of lenses, all of which have physical apertures. So you really do have the shutter speeds and apertures on the camera and your ISO dial over here on this side, just like a traditional 35mm film camera. Whereas the Nikon doesn't really have any apertures on its lenses. There are some third-party options available, but generally you have to use the dial on the front, unless you're using an S-line lens which has a control ring on it, which then you can then make that the aperture, but it doesn't click stop. So, I mean, that's not a problem for me, but for some people it does take away slightly from the really authentic feel of using a traditional camera. So when it comes to lenses, the Fujifilm X-T5 or the Fujifilm X system, any of the X series cameras, has the biggest range of AF lenses with apertures. However, Nikon does have another ace up its sleeve, and that is that there are literally millions of Nikon lenses going back into the mists of time that with the FTZ adapter you can put on this camera and focus manually. So if you want a real retro experience, that's also something worth doing. And something that's worth pointing out on the Nikon is that it has a really good manual focusing system, and that it uses the subject detect autofocus technology in manual focus as well, which means that when you're using an old manual focus Nikon lens, it will use subject detection and eye detection to immediately put a box around, for example, the subject's eye, and all you've got to do then is just focus until you get the green indicator that it's in focus, which is certainly the best implementation of any autofocus on any camera anywhere. It's a case of, for real true retro, the Nikon with the old lenses will give you that, but with the new lenses, not so much, because they don't have apertures. So let's look at the sensors now. Fujifilm X system is an APS-C format system, and the X-T5 has a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor. Nikon Zf, on the other hand, has a full frame sensor, but it's only 24 megapixels. Now, I think in terms of image quality, this is academic, because I think both of these cameras deliver fantastic pictures, far greater than the average person will ever need. So there's no need to worry about whether either of these cameras is good enough. They're both good enough. There are going to be some differences in the way that they work. For example, a larger sensor is going to give you the ability to create a shallow depth of field effect with a given lens and aperture. And also, because there are fewer pixels and the pixels are therefore bigger, you're going to get better dynamic range and better low light performance than you would get from the Fuji, even though the Fuji has more pixels and ultimately has greater resolution and perhaps greater cropping potential. Overall though, this is a fairly sort of academic argument for pixel peepers, and I think both of these cameras deliver fantastic image quality. Now, turning the cameras around and looking at the rear screens, there's a significant difference between these two screens. The Fuji X-T5 has a tilting screen which tilts both in the horizontal axis and in the vertical axis, but it stays level with the viewfinder. So in other words, it's roughly on the optical axis. The Nikon Zf, on the other hand, has a fully articulated tilt and swivel LCD. Now, which is best? Well, there is no answer to this, because it's a matter of personal taste. There are pros and cons to each one. If you're a videographer or you like to video yourself, if you're a vlogger for example, then this type of screen is better, because you can flip it right out and you can video yourself. And for videography, generally the screen to the side is not considered an issue. For stills photography, I personally prefer the tilting screen on the back of the camera. I think it's better for stills photography. I think if you're doing street photography, which I like to do, it's more subtle, more discreet. You can shoot like this and more discreetly without being spotted, whereas as soon as you swing out the LCD screen, you're kind of signposting to the world what you're doing. On the other hand, by tilting this screen inwards, you can turn it so that you've got the leatherette on the back, which not only protects the LCD screen from scratches, but also gives the camera an even more like retro finish. Next, we're going to talk about the performance. I'm going to start with the focusing. The ZF is obviously a brand new camera, and it has the X-Speed 7 processor and the subject recognition AF from the Nikon Z8. So this has cutting-edge focusing capabilities. The X-T5 is a little older, and to be honest, Fuji's focusing is not its strongest suit anyway. So the ZF is a much better camera when it comes to autofocus, much faster. But on the other hand, one thing that it doesn't have, which is kind of irritating from a focusing point of view, is there's no joystick, which the X-T5 does have. So when it comes to manually selecting your focus point in the frame, on the Nikon you have to use the D-pad. It's not a deal breaker, it's not a big problem, but if you're a left eye shooter like I am, the D-pad is right under your nose, so it's kind of a little bit awkward to use the D-pad. I think a joystick would have been better, and I wish they'd put one on like they have on the X-T5. But in fact, once you've got your focus point selected, the AF on the Nikon will be better and is faster, and the subject recognition works really well. Both cameras have in-body stabilization, but the Nikon's is the latest generation, and it's the only camera to have this new technology whereby that it uses the camera's focus point to determine the pivot point for the image stabilization for the sensor movement, which means that effectively you get about an extra stop of stabilization from the Nikon. So really it's a win from the Nikon point of view over the Fujifilm. Not that the Fujifilm is bad, these are all very small incremental points, I should point out. If you like shooting black and white, the Nikon Zf has a dedicated black and white switch on here. Effectively, it's just a shortcut to using the picture control setting, which you can do either from the touchscreen or in the menu, but it's nice to have it on the body. The Fujifilm doesn't have an actual physical black and white button. You have to go into the menu to select one of the black and white film simulation modes, or you can set a custom function for one of the buttons to be a shortcut to black and white yourself, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Once you're in black and white mode, the Nikon has a flat black and white mode, and it has a deep tone, more high contrast black and white. But this is where probably Fujifilm's ace up its sleeve, because Fujifilm's film simulation modes are just superb. You've got a choice of a whole range of different color profiles based upon Fujifilm's films, Astia, Provia, Velvia, etc. But also you've got the Acros mode, black and white mode, which is an absolutely beautiful black and white mode, and as well as just being straight Acros mode, you can also apply like a red and yellow filters so that you can customize the black and white even more. So if you like shooting black and white, even though you have a black and white dial on the Nikon, there's more control and you get a nicer potential black and white from the Fujifilm. That said, the black and white from the Nikon in deep tone mode is pretty good. Both cameras are capable of shooting 4K video at 30 FPS or 60 with a crop sensor. The video specs of both cameras is remarkably similar. I think in terms of which one you choose, if you wanted to shoot video, you might choose the Nikon because you've got the fully articulated screen, and the fact that the AF is better for shooting in video mode. The AF is also better than the X-T5. But neither of these cameras are probably designed specifically with video shooting in mind in the first place. Just one other thing to mention is that the X-T5 has dual SD card slots, whereas the XF strangely has one SD and one micro SD. I think they both got dual card slots, which is an important thing, and it matters less what the card slots are. I think unless you're a video shooter or a high-speed sports shooter, in which case the micro SD card in the XF might be a bit of a deal breaker. For me, I'm shooting stills, mostly in single shot mode. It's not particularly a problem. It is a slightly odd choice though, I'll admit. I think overall, when it comes down to choosing which of these two cameras I like the best, it's incredibly difficult, because I think I do have a soft spot for the Fujifilm system, and the X-T5 is the latest, most advanced, most accomplished version of that system. It just feels great. It feels absolutely perfect, like it's molded to the hand. It's just the right size and weight for me. Because it's APS-C, the lenses are smaller and lighter. There's a really good range of small, light lenses, all with apertures, all metal construction, and the quality of their lenses is absolutely superb. This is the 23mm f1.4, which is equivalent to 35mm, which is probably Fuji's equivalent as close as possible to this lens. But when you start getting into sort of telephoto lenses, you're going to have a smaller, lighter system with the Fuji than you are with the Nikon. As someone who loves travel photography, that's my primary interest. The Fujifilm X-T5 is probably the more suitable camera. Not only is the camera smaller and lighter, the lenses are also smaller and lighter. There's a huge range of much smaller, lighter lenses, all of which have physical apertures, metal construction, and the image quality is outstanding. Nikon are kind of newer to the retro world, if you like. So they really have this fantastic body, but they don't really have the lenses to go with it. They have this 40mm, there's two sort of retro style lenses, but they don't have aperture rings. And the rest of the lenses, although they're fantastic lenses, they're quite big and they're quite expensive. So I think if you are looking at a ZF system, it's not quite so travel friendly, and you're looking at spending more money than you would do for the Fuji system. If you did that, of course, you would have a more professional camera, a more professional kit, I guess. You'd have a camera which is built to a professional build quality spec and full frame, and there are of course benefits to that in terms of dynamic range and in terms of depth of field and that sort of thing. If you are a real big fan of full frame and you have the budget to be able to afford an XF and whatever lenses you might want to go with it, and you don't mind the fact that the lenses are not sort of retro styled as well, then the ZF is an absolutely fantastic camera which is bristling with really cutting edge tech. If you're looking for something a little bit smaller, lighter, more travel friendly, where there's a really good range of retro style lenses, then the X-T5 would be the one I would go for. Finally, one big reason for choosing the ZF is if you are a Nikon user and you have a big collection of Nikon glass, or you have the interest in buying old Nikon glass on eBay and so forth, is that when you put old lenses on this camera, they are transformed in how easy they are to focus manually using the subject detection technology which is in this camera. So from a Nikon point of view, a Nikon existing user point of view, the ZF is the best Nikon probably you can buy. Finally, if you're just getting into photography, if you're buying your first mirrorless camera, if you're converting from a DSLR to mirrorless, if you're upgrading an old mirrorless camera and you're open to any system, you want something small and light for travel, for street photography, with a good range of lenses, which isn't too expensive, then you can't go wrong with the Fuji X-T5. I think it's one of the finest cameras you can buy. I hope you found this video useful. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these two cameras, which one you'd rather have, and I'll see you in the next video.